Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Joy Project podcast. My name is Christa Avampato, and I am your host, and we are joined by Christine Caccipuoti today. Christine, welcome to the Joy Project.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk about happy things.
Yes, I'm excited to talk about happy things too, and all things joyful. And
Yes.
Christine, you have one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to all the time. I think I've listened to almost every episode. Maybe there's one or two that I might have missed, but I'm a longtime listener of Footnoting History. Best history is always in the footnotes, and it's so true. It's where the best stories are, the things people don't know.
That makes me so happy. Now I'm filled with joy.
That is my goal in this podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about Footnoting History before we get into what brings you joy?
Sure. So Footnoting History was started in 2013. So we are in our 10th year now for our 10th anniversary next year. Blows my mind when I think about it. We're a rotating group of historians who find cool things when we research, and then we share them with the people. Our goal is to be somewhat succinct. We used to do it. The idea is for a commute length, even though less people are commuting now. We want you to not have to feel like you have to give hours of your day to one of our episodes, but you can still learn something really cool about maybe something you never thought about before, or something you have heard of before, but in a different way, or maybe an angle that you never heard of. So that's kind of where we are. We kind of just cycle through. There's 5 of us right now. So one of the 5 will be who you hear each time you come on.
I love that. And has it always been the 5 of you, or have some people come and gone in that 10 years?
We've had quite a few people come and go. If you go back from the full length, myself and our host Lucy are the 2 that have been there the whole time. Our host Samantha left shortly. She was with us from the beginning, and she left to finish her PhD, and now she's back. Kristen and Josh, they joined us later on and have been with us for several years now. We kind of let people come and go if they need to. You know, life does that to you, but if they have something they want to offer, they're usually welcome back.
It's one of the things that inspired me on this podcast was keeping the conversations to a manageable amount. I love longer podcasts too, but I find that then I have to pause and come back, or I've forgotten what happened in the first part, or I don't have an hour or an hour and a half to listen to an episode. And I like that yours are about 20-ish minutes.
Yeah, we figure it's better to have somebody be able to listen to more than one episode at a time than that they can't finish the whole topic. Sometimes we'll have a 2-parter, but each one is usually able to be listened to on its own, and it'll be okay. I do also like long podcasts too, but like some of them I listen to that are really long, I'll be like, oh, it takes me 3 walks to get through it.
And as a total history nerd and a public historian and tour guide, I love all of the topics and how varied they are. I've done some of my research for my own writing based on your podcast.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so awesome. I'm going to go tell my host. They'll be so excited. That's kind of why I like that we have multiple hosts, because each person can do what they like to do. I may not know anything about the topic that Josh is covering, and he may not know anything about the topic that Lucy is covering, but our listeners get to benefit of what we all like. We learn from each other, and our audience gets to learn from 5 different people right now. So that's kind of cool. Hopefully it covers a lot of bases.
Your podcast brings me a ton of joy, which so brings me to the topic at hand. Christine, tell me what brings you joy.
A lot of things bring me joy, which is crazy because I'm really a pessimist.
A joyful pessimist.
That's it. You know, I'm the type of person who's like, oh, it's going to rain. That's probably why I have so many things that I love to counter it.
It's all about balance.
Exactly. So when you were talking to me about being on this, and I was like, Winnie-the-Pooh. Yes, I love Winnie-the-Pooh. This is exciting. I'm so ready to talk about Winnie-the-Pooh. I've loved him for forever. And by when I say Winnie-the-Pooh, I mean all the characters, not just Pooh specifically, using that to mean like the 100 Acre Wood world. And so I was really stoked, because I think keeping a love that you've had from childhood alive can be a really buoying thing when times get tough. I have no problem telling people I am in my late 30s and I still love things from childhood, because why should I give up the things that always made me happy because I happen to get older?
I originally asked you to come on the podcast after I heard your Winnie-the-Pooh episode. I grew up in the woods, and so I was always thinking, are they around the corner? Is this actually like the life that they have, and we just don't know that it's happening? And I wanted to think of myself as a little Christopher Robin out there.
Hey, we can all be Christopher Robin. That's the wonderful thing about him.
Right. Exactly.
Is that yes, of course, there was a real Christopher Robin.
And I was wondering if you could talk about the things that brought you joy when you were a kid, learning about the Pooh stories and the Hundred Acre Wood? And then has that changed? What have you grown to appreciate even more? What did you learn from Winnie the Pooh? I want to hear you just gush about everything Winnie.
Oh my gosh, it has changed. These are all things I've been thinking about recently, especially when I was writing that episode, because it was one of those things where I was writing about the history of Winnie the Pooh, and it made me really think about my own relationship to Winnie the Pooh. It was something that was always there because my mother was into Winnie the Pooh. And when she was pregnant with me, she was totally happy to give you a Winnie the Pooh when you're born. Winnie the Pooh themed stuff was always around. So like I can't actually point to a time where I discovered Winnie the Pooh. It was just always there. There's like a family story that my mom tells me that one of my aunts, when she was pregnant with me, was like, "You're not going to do Winnie the Pooh stuff for her, are you? Because I don't like Winnie the Pooh." And my mom was like, "I love Winnie the Pooh. She's getting it. Like, that's what's happening." Like, my kid's going to have Winnie the Pooh around, so you better get used to it. The original Pooh was kind of naked. He's adorable. Shepard's artwork, they're very different from the Winnie the Pooh that became Disney, but still recognizable as the same. I grew up in the 80s. It was born in the 80s. Disney Pooh was the main Pooh around at the time. My first introduction to Pooh was the Disney Pooh with the red shirt. You know, you had like the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh, then the new adventures of Winnie the Pooh, all these animated productions that were coming out and that I was obsessing with. And it actually got to the point where when I was writing the episode and I was rereading the original Winnie the Pooh stories, I was saying to myself, did I actually read these original books when I was younger? Or do I just know the stories because they've been adapted so many times? Do I know the story about the rain and Piglet because I watched the Disney stuff where they showed it? Or because I read the book? Like, because I've been doing Pooh stuff and loving Pooh stuff for so long, my timeline is mushy. But I have definitely changed what characters I identify with from that world. I've never been a Tigger fan.
Tell me why no Tigger.
He's always been too much for me because he's so hyper and I was not. I love him in a different way. Like, my appreciation for Tigger comes from that he was my grandmother's favorite character. I have certain Tigger items because they make me think of her, especially like after she passed away like 20 years ago, almost 20 years ago now. Tigger, grandma would like this, then I'll take it. He was never one that I gravitated towards for myself.
Did you have one as a child that you really identified with?
As a child, it was definitely Pooh himself. Like, there's no question. He was my favorite. He's still my number one boy because of that nostalgia factor. It was the Pooh Bear that I was carrying around. He's my guy, so I love him. As I aged, and I know because you and I follow each other on Twitter that you've seen it, I have my Piglet appreciation as an adult, where I post pictures of my Piglet stuffed animal all the time. And that was because as I got older, I started to realize that I identify with how anxious he is all the time. So I'll be like, he's my anxiety buddy. Like, we get each other. And I actually found I appreciate both Piglet and Eeyore more in the original art than I do in the Disney art. I like the Disney art because that's what I've known. And the Disney, I think it's from the Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, when they do the rain, rain, rain came down, 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 and Piglet like, that's my favorite Disney story of all time, is Piglet getting caught in the rain and like having to get rescued. But he himself was not my favorite character until I started to go back and do the deep dive into the original stuff. And I was like, the drawings by Shepard are just so beautiful. They're so gorgeous. And like, there's pictures of him, Piglet, running to carry Eeyore a balloon. And I'm like, oh my God, I want to pick you up and hug you. And I just find for some reason that the artwork for Piglet and Eeyore, and even Tigger, it makes them more warm to me than some of the Disney artwork.
One of the things that I do love about the Hundred Acre Wood and Winnie the Pooh is that it is a very rich world. Really, all these characters have a very specific personality.
Yep.
They all have their quirks. They all have things that they really love.
Right.
They have things that they're afraid of. They have a general personality. Owl, always being very studious. Rabbit's always a little bit cranky. Eeyore's always a little bit sad. Who is sort of the jubilant one, who I think he also really symbolizes joy for me. He gets joy out of everything. And there's this one quote from Winnie the Pooh that every time I think about Winnie the Pooh, it's the quote I think of. Anytime I know somebody who's lost someone close to them, and there's this in the old drawing, they're Shepard's drawings, and it's Pooh walking with Piglet. And Pooh says, "How lucky I am to have loved something that I will miss so much." Those types of learnings that we sort of hear those things as children. And as we grow up, at least for me, like, those are the things that kind of stay with me. Are there other passages that for you are so poignant, they just get right to the heart of like what the story is about?
The House at Pooh Corner, the last Pooh book, I cannot read that without bawling. Ugly cry, bawling. Well, one of the things that speaks to Milne's writing is that it's a children's book essentially, but it doesn't just keep everything happy. Get to the end of the last one. Spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read a book from the 1920s, sorry. They're all starting to get aware that Christopher Robin might not be coming back as much anymore. And to me, now I'm going to get upset talking about it. My heart just starts to break. I don't like the idea of having to give up something that you love because you're getting older. I'll meet with him and they like read him a little letter or a poem or whatever. And then they all kind of fade away. And it's just like him and Pooh and Christopher Robin and Pooh. And he's trying to kind of tell Pooh that like he might not be there all the time anymore. And Pooh's kind of getting it, but kind of not having this exchange. And I'm just thinking, I probably am largely the way I am now as an adult because I could not have that conversation with something. I ugly cry because he says like, they, assuming like the adults, like won't let me keep coming here anymore because I have to start going back to school. And he's implying that he has to grow up and start doing more big boy things. It hits me so hard. I'm always very thankful that at the end, Milne doesn't really say, oh, they don't exist anymore. Like it's done. He says that they're still playing in the enchanted places together, which to me was important. I don't think we should ever have to give up magic. Like, I don't. I feel like there's so many things in this world that are so terrible. I love stuffed animals. I was never a doll kid. I still have almost all of the ones I've ever had. I still have. That doesn't mean that I'm not doing heavy history work or dealing with personal crises, or it means that these are the things that prevent anything from ever getting to that really bad place. There's that movie about Christopher Robin that came out a couple of years ago, and where they all like are, where have you been? Kind of, we're back for you again. And I know it was a controversial movie in the sense that some people were like, well, that wouldn't have happened. That wasn't the point. The point was that that's it. He's moved on. And the real Christopher Robin did move on. He let the stuffed animals leave and that wasn't his life because he wasn't a fictional character. He was a real man. So it wasn't true to Christopher Robin in the real sense of who the actual Christopher Robin person was. It was important to see an example of why you don't really have to give these things up. It doesn't have to be Winnie the Pooh. I don't really care what it is. It's whatever the thing is that brought you joy. Could have been Legos or Batman. Like, it doesn't matter. I just find things that make you happy so important because I associate them with positivity from when I was younger. And last summer we went to Disney World. There was like a Villains Night event and Villains Night, Halloween night. Everybody was in costumes and I literally went in with my poor family. I was like, I am not leaving until I see the Pooh characters. And it was just this ability to kind of shut the world out for a few minutes and just see something that's completely wholesome, completely joyous.
Right now, we're living through a horrific period of our history. It's frightening. And I do find that the things that I loved in childhood that brought me comfort, that brought me joy, they still have an important place as an adult. There's a place for all of it when you're looking at what's my purpose and what should I do with my life and what kind of career should I pursue. There are lots of people say like, well, think about what your 8-year-old self really loved, what they gravitated to when they were young, just loving things for the pure joy of loving them.
And I guess that's part of the fight, isn't it? Like, people start to tell you, or you start to feel some sort of pressure that you can't have that pure joy anymore because other things are more important. Like, I had somebody say to me once, oh, it must be nice to have the kind of time to, watch the Winnie the Pooh movie. And I didn't get upset by it for me. I got upset by it for them because I was thinking, well, what do you do to just like turn your brain off and have a nice time? What is that thing for you? Because if you're talking to me about how kind of it's like a bad thing that I'm doing that, I don't really get it. Because that's what keeps me able to face everything. I need that few minutes, to just hang out and watch the movie or go to the show that I went to in the fall. Or sometimes it influences other aspects of my life. Like, I wouldn't probably have done a Winnie the Pooh episode if I hadn't gone to the theater and seen the Winnie the Pooh show and thought, wow, how have I never done this before for an episode? That is one of the benefits of the podcast is I can pick whatever I'm enthusiastic to talk about and do it. which is why Winnie the Pooh was something I was able to put in there, because it's like, I love this and I'm in charge of the content, so I can do whatever I want. And it was the most joyous episode to research of all the ones that I've ever done.
In order to keep fighting the good fight, and we're fighting it on many fronts, we do also have to nourish ourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup. You need to really boost yourself up. And I think that it actually has to be a daily practice.
Yes, I do a lot of dark history.
Mhm.
So being able to talk about, oh my gosh, did you know that you can still go visit the actual Winnie the Pooh plushies in New York City? It was like a great thing to be able to talk about for people. The world has been pretty dark these past couple of years, and this is something that might make somebody a little happier by hearing it. When I was polling people in my episode, I talk about like people to tell me what their favorite Winnie the Pooh character is, and people did start to tell me. Far and away, the biggest answer I got was Eeyore.
Do you think that's influenced by the times that we're living in? Like, are people feeling that, oh, that's me? Like, I see myself
It
in
was
that.
probably like 7-1. Everybody was saying Eeyore versus everybody else. I mean, a lot of people have said to me that they've always loved him. They loved him because they understood him in some way. Well, that says a lot about the character of Eeyore and how influential he can be and how important he is. Significant that Eeyore is still embraced and loved by everybody in his friend circle in the Hundred Acre Wood. Even when he's down, he's not ostracized. And I was just like, oh, I knew several people who liked Eeyore, and I like him too. But I was surprised by how many people were 1000% Eeyore.
He's a character that does not hide his feelings. He's not trying to pretend that he's something that he's
Right.
not. He really
Right.
puts himself
Yeah.
out there. I love what you just said about acceptance. In the Hundred Acre Wood, they make space for everybody and what they're going through. And Pooh's like, okay, well, is it okay if I just
Yes.
like sit here with you? I'll just sit here. I'll just be present with
And they
you.
always include him, and if he's there, he's there.
Yes.
If he's not, he's not. They recognize his birthday. Nobody's ever recognized his birthday. Or they build him a new house, but they mess it up because they don't realize they're using the sticks from his old house. It's still very sort of whimsical, but they never just push him aside because he's not the happy one. That's important. And maybe that is why he resonates with people so much, because he touches that side that most people don't really get to show.
So often we're trying to put on a brave face. Eeyore's like, no, I'm gonna let it all hang out. I'm just gonna be who I am.
Not always happy.
and
It
I
is what it is.
I think very often expects the other characters to walk away. I don't think he expects anybody to stay. And then they do.
Right.
It's like this light bulb moment. Wait, you're just going to sit here with
Right.
me, even though I may
Right.
not be the most pleasant character to be around right now? You're going to stay. Like, you're not going to abandon me when the chips are down.
What makes a character that resonates with people? Because as a little kid, I can't say that I was like Winnie the Pooh. I wasn't obsessed with food, but I was probably really identifying with Christopher Robin and didn't realize it. I loved my stuffed animals so much. Like, he was his bear, and so therefore he was my bear by extension. I just like to give a shout out to Kanga, who was so underrated as the only girl.
Totally underrated. The only woman holding her own in that 100-acre wood and has a baby. I watched the movie Being Christopher Robin. I thought it was very interesting. I did not know a lot of that backstory. I wonder if there is also anything about A.A. Milne, his own perspective of why he created the story, how he came up with these characters. Like, I think of it, Charlie Brown was a big one for me too when I was a kid. And when I went to Santa Rosa, California, I went to the Charles Schulz house. He finished the last cartoon the day before he dies. His studio is preserved exactly the way that it was.
It's so cool they're able to do that, right? Because it never happens.
Yes, which is just so wild. And that he worked up until his last day on this like life's work of his. And what's so interesting about that is that you could really learn, what was he thinking about? What did he think about these characters? Why did he create them? And people said to him, like, so I guess you're Charlie Brown and like, these are your friends. And he's, oh no, he's like, I'm actually all of them. He's like, they all are part of me. From A.A. Milne, is there any source about this is why he created the 100-acre wood, how he came up with these characters?
He didn't consider himself to really be a children's author. That was just part of his life that happened. And then he's like, I really would like people to recognize me for other things. But then, of course, Pooh is going to overtake everything. I'm actually thinking of doing a second episode that's on just the history of the Milne family to kind of go into more of that, because people have been saying things to me about that too. Like, we know about Pooh now, but like, what about them? I'm like, okay, so that's going to be the next one. Not now. It'll probably be over the summer. That one will come out maybe around Pooh's birthday and Christopher Robin's birthday. We'll see. So Milne did not really view himself as being like, I'm going to go out and be a children's author. You know, it was kind of like something that happened to him once his first book, it was a book of poems and it was very popular. And so once that became popular, it was like, well, what else are you going to write about them? And then he ended up with 4 essentially children's books. The stuffed animal Pooh was a present for his son on a birthday, not necessarily to be for a book. And then he had a few other ones. Eeyore he had on his own, that not for a book, and Piglet he had not for a book. But then like the parents went out and like bought Kanga like to possibly see what would happen in that world. In one of his writings, he basically says, my wife and my son created the characters and like I just embellished for the stories. He doesn't really take full credit. You know, it was inspired in some way by what his son was doing, playing with them, what I guess his wife was doing, interacting with them. And then also, of course, just, you know, a writer brain kind of building it out and fleshing it out and changing it and maybe being inspired by some conversation. Like, I know when he was writing his own memoir, Christopher Robin said, I don't really know if the Pooh Sticks game, we started to play it because my dad wrote about it, or my dad wrote about it because I was playing it. Because he was young, you know, he was the kid at the time. Kind of a mix of observing inspiration put together. Milne, as far as I've ever read, didn't have some great desire to write for children, but he was incredibly good at it.
The stories are so intricate, even from the very beginning, where Christopher Robin has Pooh by the paw, and he's like, if I could just stop bumping my head. And a long time ago, I worked at Toys R Us, and I worked for this amazing man named Bob Giampietro. And he, for Christmas, he made me this card that was that quote with one of the original Shepherd drawings on it. He gave me this card, and he was saying, we worked in the innovation department at Toys R Us. He felt like that line spoke to him, because if you think about how we go through our lives as adults, if we could just stop bumping our heads. And so there were all of those things that felt like they were so embedded in the story, as if like A.A. Milne had, oh, how am I going to get people's attention with saying something without actually saying it? And it felt like he had all of that in so many stories.
Which is what he does.
And it's so interesting that I wonder if that was just kismet, if like that actually wasn't his purpose. Like, did he really just write these stories to entertain people, and did he not have a bigger message?
I feel like he was smart enough, know what he was saying, but not necessarily have his heart in these types of books. Like, you can still be really good at it and have it not be your life's passion as that part of your writing, because they are universal. You can keep reading them, and every time you read them, you're going to get something different out of it. But as a kid, they're just really cool stories. You could read it to a child as an adult and be as into it as your kid is very easily.
Jim Henson is another storyteller who had that same thing of, you would watch the Muppet Show or all of the Muppet movies, and they can be enjoyed by kids and they can be enjoyed by adults of all ages. It takes a really skilled storyteller to make that happen, because it's not easy to write for all ages. It requires so much talent and so much skill to be able to do that.
Part of what made him such a good writer was he doesn't ever appear like he's talking down to anybody. So even like when Christopher Robin comes in and he's still a young child and he's talking to these essentially, you know, stuffed animals that have come to life in his world, but the conversations are never condescending. There's a respect among the characters. There's a respect from the human to the animals. And I think that goes a long way to making it feel like the reader is also respected, right? Because nothing's worse than feeling like you're being lectured.
One thing that you got into your episode that I just wanted to ask you about was Pooh came into the news recently because now he is sort of in the public domain, but sort of not. And in that episode, you do a really interesting job of explaining why he's in the public domain now or why he's not. Let's assume somebody very carefully figures out how that, oh yes, he's now in the public domain and we can somehow talk about these characters. Do you have any ideas of this is where Pooh could go next? Like, what does a 21st century Pooh look like?
Oh, wow. That's tough. He's not wearing a red shirt because that's still copyrighted.
So that's Disney. So red shirted Pooh, no, it's got to be Pooh in the buff, or he's got to be wearing something else.
I feel like they'd still be in the Hundred Acre Wood because that's sort of a place that's set away. You could put him into society, like they do put him into society in that one movie. You know, when he's coming back to find Christopher Robin or whatever. But I kind of like the idea of him being in that like the place where you can go that's not the rest of the world. And keeping that simplicity. And there are many new events. You could add more female characters. I mean, I'm not saying you have to go in and change a current character to be something different because I think that would be a little weird because they are so embedded. I'm not huge on that for these particular characters. I'm all for adding new ones because we have the story of when Kanga first shows up. That's in the original stories. So there is precedent for creating a new character and then bringing them in. And I don't know what it would be, but you could handle all different personality types that we haven't seen yet. Because we've just talked about the different kinds, whether it's the anxious one or the sad one or the hyper one. Like there are all, I mean, there's more to them than just that. But there are character features that are of each one that you could definitely bring in more things that have been acknowledged now and are being embraced now. I'd try and keep it kind of tech simple. I don't want Pooh walking around on an iPhone buying cryptocurrency. I mean, he could, but hey, you know what? Somebody might be able to do that really well. But I think maybe it's because when I went to the Pooh show, it had been a long time since I had really kind of engaged with anything new of Winnie the Pooh. And so I went in and I was like, oh my gosh, it's the Hundred Acre Wood. When you saw it on the stage, which I think is partly why I'm kind of going, I feel like you kind of have to keep the aura, like, or at least some sort of theme that is recognizable because for all the people that were in the theater when I saw it and I was listening to people talking about it, it was like an instant because you're someplace that you recognize, you're someplace that makes you happy, and then you integrate the new things. Like Disney had integrated Gopher, the character of Gopher is not in any of the books, and then he shows up in all the Disney stuff. So again, add the world because the minute you bring a new character and you get new storylines. So there are so many things you can watch them handle, kind of like Sesame Street does.
Exactly. Like that's another perfect example, right? Of a whole world filled with characters that have all types of personalities and how do they get along and what do they teach each other? What do they teach people? Like I used to actually work at Sesame Street and like I will never forget that Mr. Hooper episode. And Big Bird has to start to understand the concept of death. They tackle so many difficult subjects, but they do it in such a genuine, authentic way. And a lot of times it is through introducing they introduced a new character who has autism, right? They introduce characters who come from different cultures and different religions. And what does that mean? And how does that change the fabric of the neighborhood? It can be done really sensitively as long as it's coming from a very authentic place.
Yeah, and they do a great job because they don't go in and suddenly say, well, Elmo's not Elmo anymore, we're changing him. Instead, it actually helps absorb the new things by watching how the classic iconic character handles whatever it is. I mean, not that things can't be changed over time. Obviously, characters evolve. I get that. I'm not saying that they don't. In the way we're talking now about like how would you take Pooh moving forward, I want to see the Pooh or the Piglet or whichever one that I know, and then how they're engaging with a new situation. You can't just like throw something in there and hope for the best. That would be, you got to do a lot of work on like how the world has taken in new things before. What did they deal with? Which is kind of what Sesame Street does. They integrate everything into their stories a little more overtly, obviously, than Winnie the Pooh did in the 1920s. It's still done in a way that you're getting a story. It's kind of, I would love to see them integrate with somebody new, but in their vein. And Tigger's not in the public domain yet because he didn't come out in the first book. So you got to wait for him.
Christine, thank you so much for joining us on Joy Project. I'm so honored that you were willing to spend the time and spread your joy and teach us more about Pooh, teach us more about history. And if people want to know more about the podcast, more about you.
Thank you for having me. The podcast, you can basically just Google Footnoting History and all of our social media and our website and everything will come up. We're everywhere. It's pretty simple that way. I come up with it. But if you want me on Twitter, it's my name is Purpose. No spaces. That's from Avenue Q.
Love it. Christine, thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute joy for me to spend some time with you.
Thank you. It was so exciting. I'm very happy for your project.
Talking with Christine about Pooh and editing this episode of Joy Project was such a joyful experience for me. I loved being able to deep dive into the Hundred Acre Wood, a place I loved as a child and a place I still love now. So I wanted to share two things with you that Christine alluded to in the episode. The first is when Christine got emotional about the end of the book, The House at Pooh Corner. I wanted to read that final bit of the book to you so you can understand why it means so much to her. Then, suddenly again, Christopher Robin was still looking at the world with his chin in his hand, and he called out, "Pooh!" "Yes," said Pooh. When Pooh?" "Yes, Christopher Robin?" "I'm not going to do nothing any more." "Never again?" "Well, not so much. They don't let you." Pooh waited for him to go on, but he was silent again. "Yes, Christopher Robin?" said Pooh helpfully. "Pooh, you know, when I'm not doing nothing, will you come up here sometimes?" "Just me?" "Yes, Pooh." "Will you be here too?" "Yes, Pooh, I will be really. I promise I will be, Pooh." "That's good," said Pooh. "Pooh, promise you won't forget about me, ever. Not even when I'm 100. Pooh thought for a little. "How old shall I be then?" "99." Pooh nodded. "I promise," he said. Still with his eyes on the world, Christopher Robin put out a hand and felt Pooh's paw. "Pooh," said Christopher Robin earnestly, if I'm not quite—" He stopped and tried again. "Pooh, whatever happens, you will understand, won't you?" "Understand what?" "Oh, nothing." He laughed and jumped to his feet. "Come on." "Where?" said Pooh. "Anywhere," said Christopher Robin. So they went off together. But wherever they go, and whatever happens to them on the way, in that enchanted place on the top of the forest, a little boy and his bear will always be playing. A. Milne, The House at Pooh Corner. I just love that passage so much, and I love the idea of thinking of them at the enchanted place on the top of the forest. A little boy and his bear will always be playing, and you can just see them in the forest having a great time, laughing and being friends and just enjoying being together. And I love that image, and I love that that's how the books end. In this episode, Christine also mentioned that the original Winnie the Pooh stuffed animals, owned by Christopher Robin Milne, A. Milne's son, are on display in New York City. They're currently part of a free exhibit at the main branch of the New York Public Library on Fifth Avenue and 42nd Street. The exhibit is called the Polanski Exhibition of the New York Public Library's Treasures. I've been to the exhibit and it's fantastic. Time tickets are free and can be reserved online at the library's website. If you're not in New York City, much of the exhibition is also online on the library's website, where you can view the items and read additional details about each one of them. The library's website describes the exhibition as follows. For more than 125 years, the New York Public Library has collected, preserved, and made accessible the world's knowledge. Now, for the first time, the Polanski exhibition of the New York Public Library's treasures showcases some of the most extraordinary items from the 56 million in our collections, inspiring and empowering visitors to discover, learn, and create new knowledge today and in the years ahead. The treasures in the exhibition tell the stories of people, places, and moments spanning 4,000 years, from the emergence of the written word through to the present day. Visitors will encounter manuscripts, artworks, letters, still and moving images, recordings, and more that bring vividly to life voices of the past. While the library's collections have always been available for public use, the Polanski exhibition builds on our 125-year legacy by offering a unique opportunity to make new connections and expand our understanding of the world and each other, so that together we can shape a better future. The Pooh stuffed animals are described as follows. On his first birthday in 1921, Christopher Robin Milne received a teddy bear purchased from Harrods department store in London. Christened Winnie the Pooh, the bear soon acquired several now familiar companions: Eeyore, Piglet, Kanga, Tigger, and Roo. Roo was eventually lost in an apple orchard. In time, Christopher's playmates would come to inspire several classic works, such as Winnie the Pooh in 1926 and The House at Pooh Corner in 1928, all written by his father, A. Milne. Brought to the United States in 1947, the toys remained with Milne's American publisher, E.P. Hutton, until 1987, when they were donated to the library. Today they stand as a beloved centerpiece of the library's renowned collection of children's literature, continuing to delight and inspire both the young and young at heart. I hope you'll check out the exhibition either in person or online and delight in all of the wonders that it holds. You can find links to the website for the exhibition and the library in the show notes for this episode at christaavampato.com/joyproject. Thank you so much to Christine for joining us on Joy Project and sharing her joy of all things Winnie the Pooh. And thank you so much for listening to this episode. You can find a transcript of this episode, more information about Christine and her Footnoting History podcast, and all of the links to things we discussed at christaavampato.com/joyproject. There you'll also find links and resources for all of the episodes. And if you want to get in touch with me and tell me what's bringing you joy, visit the website christaavampato.com or find me on Twitter at ChristaNYC and on Instagram at ChristaRoseNYC. I'll be back in 2 weeks on August 23rd with another episode of Joy Project. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of those in your corner of the world. Have a joy-filled week, and I'll talk to you soon.